I gripped the steering wheel and sat there in the parking lot of my son's office building for what felt like a full minute, just staring. The snow was coming down light that afternoon, that quiet, almost polite kind of snow you get in January in Ottawa, and everything looked normal, except for one thing. My daughter-in-law's silver Honda CR-V was parked in the reserved spot right next to the front entrance, the one with my son's nameplate on the post, the one that said R. Callahan, Director of Operations. She was supposed to be in Kelowna. I'd spoken to her myself just 2 days before. She'd called me from what she said was her hotel room, said the spa weekend with her friends was exactly what she needed, that she'd be back Sunday evening. I'd heard music in the background, laughter. I hadn't thought twice about it. I was 63 years old, and had spent 40 years of my working life reading people across a boardroom table. I'd built a commercial real estate management company from nothing, 2 properties in Nepean in 1987, 11 properties across eastern Ontario by the time I handed the reins to my son Robert 4 years ago. I knew when something didn't add up. I sat there another moment, then turned off the engine. I want to go back a little, because none of what I'm about to tell you will make sense unless you understand what I thought I had. My wife Patricia passed away 6 years ago. Breast cancer. She was 58 years old, and she was the most practical, clear-eyed person I have ever known. Before she died, she made me promise 3 things: that I would keep the company and the family, that I would not become one of those old men who sits alone in a house full of memories, and that I would trust Robert. She believed in him completely. So did I. Robert was 41. Sharp, organized. He'd grown up watching me manage tenants and contractors and city permits, and he understood the business the way some people understand music. Naturally, intuitively. When I stepped back, it felt right. It felt like what Patricia would have wanted, his wife. My daughter-in-law, Nicole, I'd taken longer to warm to. Not because of anything obvious. She was polished, always pleasant with me, always asked the right questions at family dinners. But there was something careful about her. Deliberate, like every word was chosen and every smile was placed. Patricia had seen it too. She'd said to me once, quietly, then Nicole reminded her of someone counting cards. I hadn't known what to do with that at the time. After Patricia died, I told myself I was being ungenerous. Nicole worked as a mortgage broker downtown. She was good at it. I knew that much. She understood financial instruments the way I understood square footage. Robert had told me once, laughing, that she'd restructured their personal line of credit and saved them $11,000 in interest over 3 years. I'd been impressed. I'd stopped thinking of her as someone to watch. That was my first mistake. I walked into the building. The receptionist, a young woman named Brianna who'd been there since Robert took over, looked up and smiled. "Mr. Callahan, is Robert expecting you?" "No, just passing through. I was going to drop off some documents from the accountant." I held up the folder I'd brought. This was true. Our annual summary from Gerald and Associates. I'd been meaning to drop it off for a week. "Is he in?" "He's actually in a meeting right now. The boardroom." She lowered her voice slightly. "He's been in there since noon." I nodded and said I'd wait in his office. She buzzed me through. I knew the building as well as I knew my own house. I'd had it renovated in 2015. I'd chosen the flooring. I knew where every light switch was. Robert's office was at the end of the hall. The boardroom was the second door on the left. As I walked past it, the door was open about 4 inches. I heard Nicole's voice first. She wasn't speaking loudly, but Nicole had a certain way of talking in professional settings, low, clipped, authoritative, that carried. I'd heard it at family functions when she took phone calls. It was unmistakable. "The amendment needs to go through by end of month, before the fiscal year closes. That's the window." Then a voice I didn't recognize. Male. Older, I thought. Careful. "The documentation will hold. I've reviewed it twice. As long as the signatory authority is established, the transfer is clean." I stopped walking. I stood in that hallway and I did not move. Robert's voice. Quieter than the other two, and something in it I hadn't heard before. A flatness, a lack of his usual energy. "In the Merivale property? That one's the most visible." "Same process," Nicole said. "We use the management company as the intermediary. It clears in 30 days. Dad won't see it until the annual review, and by then I stepped back from the door. My ears were ringing. I walked, slowly, deliberately, back to the reception area. Told Brianna I'd forgotten I had another appointment. Left the folder on Robert's desk via the side entrance. Got back in my truck. I drove 4 blocks and pulled into the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on Carling Avenue, and I sat there with my hands in my lap, and I thought about what I had just heard. Dad won't see it until the annual review. I ordered a coffee I didn't touch. The thing about 40 years in commercial real estate is that you learn to compartmentalize shock. You learn that the worst thing you can do when something surprises you is to react. Reaction is information. Reaction tells the other party what you know. I had watched deals collapse because someone couldn't hold their face still. I held my face still. I thought about what I knew. Nicole, who was supposed to be in Kelowna, was in my son's boardroom discussing a transfer involving one of my properties. The Miraval property was one of 2 I still held personally. I hadn't transferred full ownership when I handed over operations. The company managed both on my behalf under a property management agreement I'd signed with Robert 4 years ago. The agreement gave him authority to act on my behalf for operational matters, leases, maintenance contracts, tenant relationships. It did not give him authority to transfer ownership, which meant something had been changed, or was being changed without my knowledge. The man in the boardroom. I didn't know his voice. But the phrase, signatory authority is established, and the documentation will hold. That was legal language. That was someone who worked in law or finance. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. Then I drove home, went to my filing cabinet, and started reading every document I had signed in the past 4 years. It took me 3 evenings. I am not a lawyer, but I had spent 4 decades reading commercial contracts, and what I found over those 3 evenings made me cold in a way that had nothing to do with the January temperature outside. In September of the previous year, a document had been filed with the Ontario Land Registry amending the Property Management Agreement. The amendment expanded signatory authority, Robert's ability to sign on my behalf, to include disposition of assets under management in cases of operational necessity. The amendment bore what appeared to be my signature. I had not signed that document. I sat with that paper for a long time. I looked at my signature. I had a distinctive signature. I'd been told that my whole life, a looping R and a hard downstroke on the C. The signature on the amendment was close, very close, but the R was wrong, slightly too even, like someone had practiced it but not enough. I also found, buried in a secondary folder, a draft agreement, incomplete, no date, between Callahan Property Management, Inc. and a numbered company I didn't recognize. 1247839 Ontario, Inc. The draft outlined the transfer of 2 properties, the Marivala commercial unit, valued at approximately $1.4 million, and a residential triplex in Barhaven I'd owned since 2001, valued at approximately $890,000. Combined value, approximately $2.3 million. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I called my accountant, Martin Gerard, and asked him a single question. Had he seen any activity on those 2 properties outside of the standard management reports? He paused for slightly longer than I would have liked, then said he hadn't. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, a man named Dennis Okafor, a real estate lawyer I'd worked with in the late 90s before he'd moved to a smaller boutique firm in the Glebe. Dennis was 70 now, semi-retired, and he owed me nothing, which was exactly why I trusted him. I told him I needed a quiet conversation. He said, "Come Thursday." I didn't tell Robert. I didn't tell Nicole. I didn't change anything about how I behaved. I texted Robert that Sunday to ask about the Raptors game, the way I always did. I had Nicole and Robert over for dinner the following Wednesday. I made the lamb stew Patricia used to make. I opened a bottle of wine. I sat across the table from my daughter-in-law, and I watched her talk, and I kept my face very still. Nicole told me about the Kelowna trip. She showed me a photo of herself at what looked like a vineyard on her phone. She laughed about the weather. I said it looked wonderful. I asked if the hotel was nice. She said it was beautiful. I passed her the bread and I thought, "You have done this before." Dennis reviewed everything over 2 meetings. He brought in a colleague of his, a woman named Adriana, who specialized in document fraud, and she examined the September amendment. Her conclusion, delivered without drama, was that the signature was not mine. The pen pressure was inconsistent with my other signed documents. The formation of specific letters pointed to someone who had copied from a sample rather than signing naturally. Forged, she said. Cleanly done, but forged. Dennis then did a corporate search on 1247839 Ontario Inc. It had been incorporated 11 months prior. The sole director was listed as a numbered holding company in British Columbia. The BC company's director, after 2 more layers of searching, was Nicole. I sat in Dennis's office on a gray February afternoon, and I looked at that corporate search result, and I thought about Patricia, and about the words she had used, counting cards. Dennis asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted everything documented, everything verified, and then I wanted to understand the full picture before I moved. He nodded and said that was the right instinct. Over the next 3 weeks, with Dennis coordinating, we engaged a forensic accountant, a woman named Grace Park, referred by Dennis, who had 20 years of experience in financial investigations. Grace requested 6 years of Callahan property management records through a formal legal notice, which Robert was required by law to produce. Robert called me when he received the notice. His voice was very controlled. "Dad, what's going on?" "Routine review," I said. Dennis suggested it when I updated my estate documents. "Nothing to worry about." A pause. "Okay, sure. I'll have everything over to them this week." "Thank you, son." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment with my hand on the counter. Grace's report came back 5 weeks later. She found 3 categories of irregularities. First, management fees had been overstated by approximately $47,000 over 3 years, small enough to fall below any threshold I would have noticed in a summary report, but consistent across billing periods. Second, a maintenance contractor, a numbered company, had been paid $138,000 for work across my 2 properties over the same period. When Grace cross-referenced corporate registrations, the maintenance company and the numbered transfer company from the draft agreement shared a registered agent. Third, the draft transfer agreement I had found had a more complete version in the company files, dated, initialed, awaiting only one final signature to trigger. Mine, or someone's version of mine. Total amount diverted, or at risk, somewhere between $185,000 already extracted and $2.3 million in properties. Dennis filed a report with the Ontario Provincial Police Financial Crimes Unit on a Tuesday in March. He also filed an emergency injunction with the Superior Court of Justice that same day, freezing any disposition of both properties pending investigation. The call from Robert came at 7:30 that evening. He didn't shout. That surprised me. His voice was very quiet, which was somehow worse. "You went to the police." "I did, Dad, Robert." I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the snow was gone and the first pale light of March was coming through. "I need you to understand something. I built everything this family has. I did it honestly, and I did it with your mother. What I found in those documents is not a misunderstanding. I gave you every opportunity and every trust a father can give a son. What I'm asking you now, and I'm only asking once, is to tell me the truth about how far this went." Silence. "Nicole came to me," he finally said, "about 1.5 years ago. She had the whole thing structured. She said you were getting older, that eventually the properties would be tied up in probate, that we should just accelerate things. She said the amendment was just a formality, that you'd already verbally agreed to it." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I want to believe you didn't know your signature wasn't mine." "I didn't, I swear to you. She handled all the documentation. She said you'd reviewed it." "The contractor fees, Robert." A long pause. I knew the numbers were off. I told myself it was a rounding issue. I didn't look closely enough. I didn't look ghastly enough. There are things a parent says in moments like that, and things a parent holds back. I held most of it back. "You'll need your own lawyer," I said. "Call someone tonight." Nicole was arrested 4 days later at Pearson International Airport in Toronto. She had a one-way ticket to Lisbon. She had 2 pieces of luggage and a carry-on. She did not have me. The OPP investigation took 8 months in total. The forensic accountant's report formed the backbone of the Crown's case. The forged amendment was confirmed. The shell companies were traced. The maintenance contractor payments were confirmed as fraudulent disbursements. The BC holding company was found to contain $163,000 in transferred funds. Nicole was charged with fraud over $5,000, forgery, and uttering forged documents. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts to avoid trial. She was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $163,000 in restitution. Robert cooperated fully with the investigation. The Crown determined that while he had been negligent, willfully so, a Crown attorney said, in a way that bordered on complicity, there was insufficient evidence to establish that he had known about the forged signature or directed the shell company structure. He was not charged. He resigned from the company. He has been in counseling. We speak on the phone once a week. It is not what it was, and I do not know yet what it will become. Some things take longer than you expect. The injunction held. Both properties remain in my name. The management company has been restructured under a new agreement with a property management firm that has no connection to my family. Martin Gerald, my accountant, resigned and is under review by CPA Ontario. His role in the management fee irregularities is still being examined. I sit sometimes in the kitchen where Patricia and I had breakfast for 30 years, and I think about what I should have seen sooner. I think about the way Nicole smiled at dinners, the way she showed me the photo from Kelowna, the way she refilled my wine glass without being asked. I think about the document with the wrong R in my signature, and the person who sat across from me at that table, knowing it existed. People will tell you that getting older means losing your edge, that you become easier to fool, easier to overlook, easier to move around like a piece of furniture. I want you to hear this from a man who is 63 years old, who built something real, who lost his wife too soon, and who sat in a Tim Hortons parking lot on a January afternoon with cold coffee and 40 years of experience and figured out how to fight back quietly and correctly. Age is not a liability. Patience is a weapon. And the one thing people who think they're smarter than you will always underestimate is how long you can wait before you act. Patricia used to say, "Trust what you see, not what you're told." I forgot that for a few years. I won't forget it again. I've thought a lot, in the months since all of this came to light, about the choices that led to that January afternoon in a Tim Hortons parking lot on Carling Avenue with a coffee I never touched. Not Nicole's choices, mine. I chose to stop paying attention. I chose to interpret Patricia's warning as grief talking. I chose to see what I wanted to see at those dinner tables. A family that was holding together, a son who was thriving, a business that was in good hands. I told myself that stepping back was wisdom, that trust was love, and, in a sense, those things were true. But trust without awareness is not wisdom. It is just a door left open. What happened to me was not random. Nicole did not target a sharp man and win. She targeted a man who had decided, somewhere quietly inside himself, that his fighting days were behind him, that the hard work of watching closely was someone else's job now. Every action she took, the forged amendment, the shell companies, the fabricated spa weekend, was built on one foundation, the assumption that I had already checked out. She was almost right. The moment I sat in that parking lot and chose not to react, not to call Robert, not to storm into that boardroom, that was the moment the outcome began to shift. Not because silence is always the right answer, but because I finally started thinking instead of feeling. I reached back for something I had used for 40 years and put down too early, and it was still there. That's the thing nobody tells you about experience. It doesn't expire. It waits. What I want you to take from this is not a story about a bad daughter-in-law or a son who looked away when he should have looked harder. Those are real, and they matter, and the consequences were real. But the deeper story is about what happens when a person mistakes comfort for safety and delegates not just responsibility but vigilance. Integrity is not only about doing the right thing when someone is watching, it is about maintaining the habit of clear-eyed honesty with yourself, about what you know, what you're avoiding, and what you owe to the life you built. Robert failed that test for a period of time. I had failed it quietly for longer. The difference is that I caught it, and I acted. There is a kind of strength that only becomes visible under pressure. You don't know it's there until something forces you to use it. I am 63 years old. I have buried my wife, built a company, and sat across a dinner table from a woman who was in the process of stealing from me while I passed her the bread. and I am still here with my properties, with my name, with my dignity intact. Age does not weaken a person who refuses to let it, and the most dangerous opponent anyone can underestimate is someone who has learned, over decades, at real cost, how to be patient. Patricia was right about Nicole. She was right about most things. What I owe her now is to honor what she saw in me, even in the years I forgot to see it in myself. Trust what you see, not what you're told. Stay sharp, and never ever assume that the quiet man across the table has stopped paying attention.